And so I think potentially that could have backfired on you. Number one, by kind of putting all your eggs in that one basket. And it's a job. You're working there, and maybe you need to keep working there to put a roof over your head and food on the table. Great. Let's talk about some other things that you can do to get some better, more quote-unquote real clinical experience that will help convince an admissions committee that you've gotten the exposure that you need. Application Renovation Season 2, Episode 7. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to dive into your application, dive into your story, and hopefully help you put a better foot forward next time when it comes to your application to medical school. Let's start with kind of your thoughts, your reflection on the application cycle and where you think you went wrong.
Yeah, so honestly, I applied because I really stood by my application except for my Mcat score. I think that was where I failed a little bit. I really stand by my GPA. I really like my extracurriculars that I do currently. But the Mcat, I think, is where I suffered a little bit. So.
Okay. And do you think it's just your Mcat score that you think was holding you back?
I know that my clinical hours, I work currently in a clinical setting, and I actually spend more than 50% of my time with patients, but I know some admissions offices probably see the word scheduler and they might not consider that clinical experience. I think that might be an issue as well.
Yep. I'm glad you brought that up as a potential issue because it's something that I flagged as I was reviewing your application. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go through your application, take some notes, think about some questions. We'll cover some questions at the end as I kind of cover everything that I see as I was looking at your application.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds great.
Yes. And you did apply MD and DO. I do have both of those applications, but I looked at your AACOMAS application just to focus on, because we don't look at a lot of DO applications here on Application Renovation. So,
alrighty.
All right, so we'll take a look at the application. We're going through just general demographic information, lots of black boxes blocking out all of your information, no big red flags in terms of felonies and misdemeanors and other stuff, which is good. Definitely helps. We do get to the Mcat very early on in the AACOMAS application, which is funny. At least the AMCAS application, at least how they present it in a PDF, they put the Mcat a little bit lower down.
Give some time.
But AACOMAS is like Mcat right off the bat. So 499. And that score itself isn't super scary. Obviously, it's not great. The bigger thing for me is that subsection score on chemistry.
Yes. So I actually hadn't taken physics 2 yet, and then I took physics 1 like 2 years before I took my Mcat, and I know that really affected me because I didn't get a lot of the big physics concepts, as you can see by that subsection score. So
that helps explain that. So hopefully a retake can potentially help with that. And then we get into grades. And so just scanning through your grades, nothing big stands out. A C in calculus. Obviously not, you're not alone in that journey. Lots of A's, which is great. A few B's, which is amazing. So GPA-wise, I'm assuming, as I look through here, GPA-wise, not an issue. Cumulative undergrad, 372. Science GPA, 355. And non-science 382. So solid GPA, showing that from an academic standpoint, you're probably not going to have any big issues. I wish that translated into a higher Mcat score, which usually it does, but not for everyone. But that's okay. We can talk about Mcat plans in a little bit. Again, AACOMAS kind of breaks down all the different Mcat score reports and everything else. And then we get into the activity section, and I see this musculoskeletal stress markers research that you're doing. And I highlighted something here in the description where you talked about, in conducting my research, I tied in my love for the skeletal system, right? It's just another way of saying, I like science.
Yeah.
So I try to have students stay away from that kind of language. I go, you obviously like science enough, like the bones enough. I have my little Mr. Bones over here next to me.
Right.
I wanted to be an orthopod. That was the goal. So I love the skeletal system as well. But it's not something you need to go screaming from the rooftops. That's not something that they're going to go, oh my gosh, we finally found someone who loves the skeletal system.
Yeah, the search is over.
and potentially maybe, and I don't know if this was your thought process, if I were to compare it to your AACOMAS application, did you add this in because you're like, oh, this is the DO application. They're going to like that I like the skeletal system?
Yeah, I did actually.
Yeah. See,
I've
done this once or twice. Yeah. So, and it's just, it's obvious when you think about stuff like that what students are doing.
Gotcha.
Looking at the next thing here, president of Phi Sigma Sigma, again, trying to sell yourself, right? The first one was loving the skeletal system. This one's being an empathic leader. You don't need to sell me that you're an empathic leader. Tell me a story maybe that shows some empathy.
Yeah.
I do like that you have some very good numbers here about the listening and communicating with 25 women, how you have here volunteered over 300 hours a semester. So good stuff with that as you are showing impact, which is good to show in these extracurricular descriptions. This peer mentor, I have just a note here that says, tell me a story, right? You were assigned to 4 proteges during your time as a mentor. Give me a story of one of them that just was really impactful for you, or where you were impactful for them. Volunteer, student rep, no big mentions, no big issues there. So just better storytelling all around for everything. I could pick apart every description that students write and just say, tell me a story, tell me a story, tell me a story. So, healthcare experience you have listed here, patient care aide at the hospital. Again, the sales pitch at the end, this teaches me patience and provides me with a sense of joy when seeing these kids smile. And the goal of this isn't to understand that you have patience, right? The goal of this is to see who you are as a person, how you impact people's lives. And then we dive into this procedure scheduler. And I had a question here. I wrote a note. On your AMCAS application, you have 4,300 hours listed for this. Here you have 2,000 hours. Is that because you extrapolated out to start of med school for AMCAS and all of those potential hours? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. That's what I assumed, but just wanted to confirm. And so this was my biggest question mark here. You have this listed as healthcare experience. You have this listed as a procedure scheduler.
Yes.
And the majority of people who work in healthcare know what a scheduler does, and it's not clinical at all.
Right.
And so this is where I always get hung up with students. Whenever I talk about clinical experience and lack of clinical experience and how to get clinical experience, I'll get 1 million messages on Instagram, on TikTok now, on wherever saying, is this clinical experience? Is this clinical experience? Is this clinical experience? And my answer is, I don't know. I don't know based on the title, unless you're saying you're a nurse, maybe you're a nurse admin, right? Right now you're more hospital administration as a nurse. I don't know based on the title if what you are doing is clinical experience or not.
Yeah.
Where it can go wrong and backfire is when you put physician scheduler as clinical experience and don't really help explain why you are labeling it as clinical experience. And so for me, that was a red flag as I was reviewing your application. So let's look at how you describe this in a little bit more detail. So right off the bat, you say, I schedule surgeries, procedures, and imaging ordered by the physicians. Stop, right? You don't have a period there, but I just want to stop there. So right off the bat, I'm like, yes, that's what a scheduler does. And that is not clinical experience, that's administration. All right. You then continue the sentence by saying, and meet directly with the patients and families. Yes, that's true. And my assumption is based on my understanding of the healthcare system is a lot of times that procedure scheduler is someone kind of on the way out of the office, sitting behind some desk somewhere saying, okay, patients are going to get handed off to you by the CNA, medical assistant, nurse, doctor, whoever that is, saying, okay, here, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you're gonna talk to this young woman, and she's going to help you schedule everything else, right? And so, yes, that is meeting with the patients, but I would still argue that's not clinical experience. It's the same argument that I've had with students who do patient registration in an emergency department. They say, well, I interact with patients, I talk to them. I'm like, yeah, in an administrative function. You go and say, what insurance do you have? What, like, who's your contact information, right? That kind of stuff. That's interacting with a patient. It's still administration. I probably wouldn't count that. You continue, right? Roughly 70% of my time is spent with patients and families. I think you are trying to sell the fact that this is clinical experience by putting that.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, I understand what a scheduler does, and you're interacting a lot, saying, okay, does this day work? Does this time work? Does this day? Does this time? Or what insurance do you have? We're gonna need a prior authorization for that, right? All of this conversation stuff that's administration and not clinical experience. And so I think potentially that could have backfired on you. Number one, by kind of putting all your eggs in that one basket. And it's a job. You're working there, and maybe you need to keep working there to put a roof over your head and food on the table. Great. Let's talk about some other things that you can do to get some better, more quote-unquote real clinical experience that will help convince an admissions committee that you've gotten the exposure that you need. And again, knowing the obviously healthcare system kind of inside and out, procedure schedulers, it's a great job. You're getting a lot of kind of messages from everyone and interacting with everyone, and obviously being an amazing communicator, an amazing organizer. You have to be super empathetic to understand, be like, oh, this patient just came out and they need to go have this one scan done to see if the cancer is spread everywhere. Like, you have to have empathy in that. And compassion in that situation. So I'm not downplaying the role of a procedure scheduler. I'm just making sure that you are getting the appropriate exposure to what it's like to kind of be on the other side of that desk in that patient room with the doctor as everything is going on. So that really is a huge thing for me. You have this kind of fascination with death that we'll talk about a little bit that seems to be very pervasive throughout season 2 of Application Renovation. But you kick it up a notch by actually going and doing some autopsies and shadowing in that kind of world. So that's good. I would call it clinical experience. It's definitely different clinical experience. Obviously, forensic pathologists doing autopsies as part of their job is just a little bit different clinical experience.
They don't really talk much, so.
The patients or the doctors?
The patient. Well, both, I guess.
Yes. And then you have job shadowing here. I mark this a little bit, so it's a little bit older for job shadowing, because I don't think you had shadowing listed elsewhere, if I remember. Oh yeah, you had the cardiology. That was more recent, which was good. The reason I listed this one as a potential question mark is, I don't know. I questioned, right, is it really shadowing a pathologist? But it is, so I'll give it to you.
Clinical.
I marked the dates more than I marked the description, so I don't know. I was just second guessing myself. But that's fine. It's older. You do have more recent stuff, which is fine. All right, and then we get down to some more stuff. This non-healthcare volunteer, Children's Heart Foundation. Again, trying to to sell yourself. You have this teaching me leadership, communication skills, right? You don't need to sell yourself. Tell me the story, show me some impact, show me that you communicated with these people through a story, right? Again, same thing on the next one. Taught me building a relationship with people who were once strangers is very gratifying. I'm like, cool. Okay. You're good with strangers. Got it. Love it. So again, just not impactful storytelling, which is so much of what I try to focus on, because whether your GPA or Mcat score is kind of on the edge, that story will help get you over the edge. Or even on the other end, we've had other students this season with great stats, and their story probably held them back. So it's really important to tell that story. And then we get into your personal statement here, and I get into a lot of the why. Like, why does this make you want to be a physician? And I'm concerned very early on. The second paragraph. Let me finish with the first paragraph. The reflection kind of thing is my time as an autopsy intern showed that medicine can also be quiet and empathetic. So I read that and I go, okay, I don't understand what that means, why you're telling me that, why that makes you want to be a physician. Remember, the goal of this is why medicine, not what you understand or what you think you understand, but why do you want to be a physician? Then the next paragraph, it's probably super common, and I'll poke fun at it a little bit, knowing that a lot of students are probably in the same boat, but trying to think about how we can position this maybe a little bit better. And I joke about this all the time with, like, you need the clinical experience, the shadowing, the exposure to patients and physicians, so that you're not coming in saying, I want to be a doctor because I love Grey's Anatomy. Right? Which is literally in your essay here, you're like, my initial interest in medicine was sparked by the television show Bones. I'm like, right? She's not even a physician as far as I know.
She's not.
Yeah. I love Bones too, by the way. It's a great show.
And I really debated whether or not to put that in there, and I kept taking it out and I kept putting it in.
Yep.
And I was just like, it kind of started... It really did start the journey, and I could have started a little differently, but yeah. Yeah. And I'm not against having it in there. As long as you understand that there might be a little bit of pushback, like me going, oh, really? A TV show is why you want to be a doctor? Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, that's true. If your parents aren't physicians, if you don't have friends or family members who are physicians, who are nurses, who are in healthcare, your exposure is going to come from media. Or your own personal injuries or illnesses, or family members' injuries or illnesses. And maybe you have one of those stories potentially that you could lean on to go, okay, I'm just going to talk about that instead of Bones. But if you don't, you don't, and you have to tell your story, and your story is Bones. Right. And so that's okay. I think the part potentially that gets a little bit too far is where you're like, I was enamored by the portrayal of helping individuals in their most vulnerable state, and how, like, these people were dead. They weren't vulnerable. Like, if I remember what Bones is about, they were dead.
I guess I meant more the family, but I didn't really tie that in well.
Yeah. So I think that's potentially the mistake was leaning too hard on the story of Bones as to why you're doing this, versus there was just something that fascinated me about what was going on, and I wanted to explore it more. Right? Very similar to someone who, like, literally has no other story than, I really did like science in school. I really was amazed by the human body when we studied it in elementary school. And I'm like, great, if we have nothing else to lean on, let's lean on that story. But let's, as quickly as possible, get off of it and focus more on some real world stuff. Okay? And you did, right? You became an autopsy intern, which is obviously a great experience, and showing what you're doing and directly connects with what Bones is doing. I mean, kind of. So that's good. And you focused on a lot of that experience, right? Going to these crime scenes, or going to places where you had to retrieve a body, and what that was like. And so at the end of the day, the question comes down to, again, why medicine? So
Right.
you have here, and I haven't highlighted it yet, I was pushed to explore medicine and physicians who help the living so I could help families gain more precious time with loved ones. So there's the potential like switch of, why do I want to potentially explore something else? Now, the question is not necessarily what type of physician do you want to be, right? A pathologist is a physician. And so you're getting into a little bit more of not necessarily why medicine. You're saying, well, I wasn't really sure I wanted to be a pathologist. Let me go explore something else. Versus, here's really what I loved about the pathology world and why it motivated me to continue down this path. Gotcha. You're like, okay, I checked pathology off my list. I don't want to do that anymore. Okay?
Okay.
And so then you start volunteering at the Children's Hospital as a patient care aide, which is great. You go into a story, which I love, this patient named Jay, so that's good. Like, I love stories. I'm all about it. And you get into this discussion, talking about this whole discussion going on. He was able to forget his condition, act like a normal kid for a few moments. And then, the reflection is so important. His trust was something to be cherished and respected. Why did that make you want to be a physician? Why did that interaction with Jay? You obviously told me the story of Jay because it was important to you. How did that experience solidify in your mind or strengthen in your mind that you want to be a physician? You have to lead the reader down that path.
Okay.
Again, you're focused on specialty, right? I considered specializing in forensic pathology. I discovered that the patients I encounter are my main reason. You should have put the live patients I encounter. Right. The breathing ones are the ones that you want to interact with. So then you talk about these procedures and what you've done there, shadowing. You do have another potential story here, right, during one encounter, which is great. I love being very specific. One encounter, a patient disclosed that she had. Try to use a name again, right? You used Jay in the previous one. Try to use a name instead of the patient. Okay. You have here, understanding the needs of a patient is a privilege. I would say it's pretty generic, right? I think it's very easy to understand the needs of a patient without being a physician, right? You're a procedure scheduler. You understand the needs of a patient. They need this appointment and that appointment and this and that. I will continue to cultivate that privilege throughout my medical journey. That doesn't tell me that you need to be a physician. That doesn't tell me that you want to be a physician. That's just saying, hey, trust is good. Medical. I'm going to keep building that trust and keep building that understanding. Okay? Again, back onto forensic pathology. You're like, it's like, I love you, but I have to leave you, but I love you, so I keep coming back, right? And so just kind of the recap and bringing forensic pathology back in. So the kind of generic statement here at the end, right? Every patient deserves to be heard and treated. Yes, that is true. Doesn't tell me anything about you, right? Generic. I will welcome their stories with both open ears and an open heart. Great. Kind of lovey-dovey, kind of good kind of thing, which is fine. I mean, that conclusion paragraph should be kind of more of that higher level, how you want to act, what do you want to accomplish as a physician. I'm just at the very end of reading this, I'm still left with why medicine, a little bit more impactful stories, and more importantly, a little bit more impactful reflections as to why those stories were important for you.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then we move on to, that's it. So really for me, right, your MCAT score section breakdown, right, if we go back to your MCAT, that 122 is a really big potential issue. I've seen plenty of students on AACOMAS I've seen plenty of students on their DO application, 496, 497 Mcat scores, get into medical school. Your stats are not an issue, your GPA stats. I think a chunk of your potential issue is that clinical experience. With that procedure scheduler being considered not clinical experience and them writing you off going, well, if without this, what does she have? And then the lack of the reflection and really good storytelling to show me why you want to do this outside of loving bones.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And currently when I took my MCAT, I just read books. I read the Kaplan books, and I didn't realize I was really more a visual person, and audible. And so I discovered Khan Academy, and I should have been using that all along.
Yep.
I'm planning on a retake, and I've actually been using it for about the past month. So it's been much better, I think, with that too.
Yeah, a better MCAT score will definitely open up a lot of doors for you. And if you haven't started exploring other clinical experiences, like volunteering at hospice or getting more involved in different parts of potentially that kind of food chain of being where you are now, to say, hey, you like go to your boss and say, hey, like, can a little bit of the day, can I like check in patients and take vitals and take their history, and like, can you teach me how to do that? You have that exposure. They obviously have your trust already. Do they know you're applying to medical school?
They do, yeah.
Okay,
a part of them, some of them have written like letters of rec and everything. So yeah.
Good. That will definitely help. And so potentially be honest and say, hey, like, can maybe, like, if it's a little bit slower, or can I have, like, if you have someone else that can maybe cover for you for an hour or two a day, can I check some patients in, and can I shadow? Can I get some more of these experiences that I'm missing? Not to check the box, but that you can
explore it,
to explore, to have more experiences, to be able to reflect on them in your personal statement, in an interview, and beyond.
Okay, gotcha.
Got it?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Yes. I guess it's kind of it's a weird one. So I do have other experiences. However, I guess it's not really a question, more of a statement, I guess, to throw at you. But when I applied originally, I had recently, I'm identified LGBT, and I had come out to my family. But I didn't disclose it because I was advised by some medical professionals to not include that in a personal statement. But I do have like a clinical thing that's kind of shaped around my LGBT status, and I guess I didn't include it because I was advised not to, and I felt really torn about it. But I would tell you that that's probably bad advice. Okay.
Depending on how you wanted to use it, right? If you're trying to just throw it into the personal statement to say, hey, look at me, I'm diverse because I identify as this, and you are trying to increase your diversity, so pick me, that's not the best way to use it. If you're including it because it's part of your story as to why you want to be a physician, then great, let's talk about it. I think at the end of the day, the whole application process, the whole interview process, this whole process is about telling your story. And if that is your story and you avoid telling it, you are leaving a chunk of who you are out. It's the same reasoning, completely different, but same reasoning is when students avoid talking about their parents who are in healthcare because they're like, I don't want to be seen as someone doing this just because my parents are in this. Like, but that is your story. Whether or not they wanted you to be a physician, pushed you away from medicine, whatever, them being a physician had an impact on your life, and you avoiding talking about it is really missing something in your application and not connecting the dots appropriately. And that can be seen. I can pick, just like I could look at your experience description and go, hey, did you talk about the skeletal system because this is the DO application, right?
Yeah.
A good reviewer who has seen thousands upon thousands of applications like I have can understand this stuff. Like we know you better than you think you do. You're like, I'm going to pull a fast one on them. Like, no, you won't. So really at the end of the day, you have to tell your story. And having someone tell you not to include something in your application, you should just run away at that point. My general advice is always, you can include it if you understand the consequences of it, right? Students who potentially are talking about mental illness or other potential disabilities that may bring in some negative bias from a reviewer.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
Got it?
Got it.
All right. Well, hopefully this will helpfully set you up for success when it comes to your next application cycle. And please keep us updated on your journey.
I definitely will. Thanks so much.
Thank you.